Be seated. On Tuesday, the clergy of the region spent the day with Bishop Dici discussing pressing issues of the diocese. Among the most pressing were the topic of refugees and sanctuary. The refugees were an important issue because we are in the midst of the worst refugee crisis the world has seen since World War II. More people have been displaced by violence today than at any other time since 1945. We also discussed the sanctuary movement with towns and churches becoming sanctuary places. I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. So that was Tuesday. The rest of the week was spent at the Trinity Institute, or to be precise, in the Wilkes Room and the parish hall, where we were a partner site for the Trinity Institute. We had the simulcast there. It was, by the way, remarkable. It was there that we learned about several major water issues facing the world today. Among them, pollution, commodification of water, which results in unjust water distribution, climate change, which results in things like drought and flooding, often in the same places and often extreme, and of course, rising sea levels, just to name a few. Now, being where we are, living where we do, if it weren't for the news, you could probably be completely unaware of any of these things going on. Because our little corner of the world is one of the least affected by any of it. We're not an island nation that has about a decade before it's completely underwater. We aren't among the billion people who have no access to potable water. And even though the last few years we've said we have drought, we haven't really experienced drought the way others have. Last year I took a picture of green grass and I said, this is a New York drought. My friends in California were not amused. And then we have winter. That may be the biggest thing we notice about weather, is that our winters seem to be a little bit milder. But you know what? I just haven't found that many people who are all that upset about it. In short, we don't see what's going on. And maybe we don't want to. And that is something that the scriptures have been talking about for a very long time. Not wanting to see. One of my favorite stories about not seeing what's right in front of you is today's gospel. There you have this beggar who's been blind from birth. And now he is miraculously healed by Jesus, something that no one has ever done before in their experience. And as he heals the man, he teaches the crowd that this sickness, this blindness, and he might as well add poverty and other forms of suffering, has nothing to do with whether or not he deserves it. Which is an important lesson because a lot of people at the time believed that. Poor people are poor because they deserve to be poor. Sick people are sick because they deserve to be sick. Oh, a lot of people still believe that. And yet that wasn't the main point of this story. The main point is that this healing takes place on the Sabbath. That Jesus had the audacity to heal somebody on the Sabbath. The fact that an unprecedented miracle has just taken place, that a man who has never been able to see can now see, is completely lost on the leadership. I say leadership, by the way, even though in the gospel story it talks about the Pharisees and the Jews. Did you catch that? The Jews did this, the Pharisees did this. Those two terms are sort of John's catch-all phrases for the leadership of the people in Jerusalem, the leadership of the Jews. So I'll just say leadership. And it's completely lost on them, this great thing. Why? Well, in part, because by this time in his ministry, the leaders have already figured out that they hate Jesus. And they are looking for any excuse to condemn him. They couldn't see the work of God done right before their very eyes because all they could see was somebody they hated. Ironically, it's left to the blind man to point this out. At first, he just tells bystanders what happened. You know, the man put mud on my eyes, told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam, and I did, and I could see. But then they bring him to the Pharisees, to the leadership, and bring him in for questioning. And that's where he recognizes publicly, bless you, that Jesus must be a prophet. Well, then he goes away. Then they bring him back in for more questioning. Only it's the same questions. And they've already told him what they want him to say. And when they do, he chides the council for not seeing the obvious. That Jesus clearly must be a man of God, even though they, of all people, should know it, right? They're the religious people. So what do? They kick him out. And there he is, though, finally facing Jesus. And it's at that point where he can proclaim freely what he has seen. Lord, I believe. For much of humanity's history, we have not seen as God sees. As the prophet Samuel said, God sees with the heart. We see outward appearances. God sees with the heart. We see power. God sees with the heart. We see dollar signs. God sees with the heart. And we see only our little circles. And as long as we're taken care of, that's all that matters. I caught myself slipping into that peculiar blindness during the Trinity Institute when an expert was showing maps of the rising sea levels and what it's going to look like over the next 70 years or so. And as he's showing these maps of lower lying areas disappearing, two things ran through my head. And the first was, well, even though a third of the world's population is going to be underwater by 2080, including a chunk of Manhattan, by the way, the mid-Hudson Valley will not be. So we're good. And the second was, even if it gets bad, this isn't till 2080. I'll be dead by then. So it's okay. In the blink of an eye, I went from caring priest to self-centered jerk, neglecting both those who are being affected right now and future generations who will pay for the sins of their forebears. And if you have children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, That's them. That was a very depressing moment for me when I realized this. But then I brightened up. I said, well, it's okay. It's Lent after all. You're supposed to be depressed. It's okay. But more importantly in Lent, we remember that we are people of faith, that we are people of hope, that we are people of love. So the leadership who accused Jesus because he had the audacity to heal somebody on the Sabbath, it was they who couldn't see because they felt their power and position were threatened. We fall into that all the time. However, when we keep our eyes on Christ, who is the light of the world, then we can see what's important. In fact, getting our heads out of our own self-centeredness and refocusing on Christ, who is the light, will always help us to see that nothing is hopeless, ever. We trust, always trust, that the Lord is our shepherd, and that even though we walk through the shadow of the valley of what surely can seem like death, he is with us, and so we shall fear no evil. Now, the focus of these past few days has been mostly on water and climate. And it's impossible to discuss in a sermon all the ways we can act on that one issue. And there are a lot. But here's one. Next month, April 29th, I believe, is the date, there is a climate march in Washington to draw attention to this really serious issue that nobody seems to see. I know that a lot of Episcopalians are going, and at least one parishioner, and I think more, are going. And you may say to yourself, not another march. What good does another march do? But listen to the words of St. Paul, who says, we are children of light, and as such it is our job to expose the works of darkness. That's what that is, exposing the works of darkness. Now, whether it's the issues of water justice or refugee justice or justice to the sick and the poor or the alien in our midst, or acknowledging our own sinfulness and need for God's loving embrace, because what we need is not found online or in the seats of power or in money or anything else. Whether it's any of that, we know this. We are called upon right now to expose the darkness, to refocus on Christ, to let Christ heal our blindness, to walk toward that light, and yes, to be the light. Amen.